So let's start by catching back up. Last week we were in Matthew chapter 9. For those of you that participated on that, what did we miss out on? What was happening in Matthew chapter 9?
Some things.
When you say things.
Things and stuff. Wow, deep.
Yeah. Well, Jesus had been preaching, I guess, and then he got in the boat and they went out a ways. But they came to, I think must have just gone over to another shore because some people brought a paralytic man to him. And I thought it was wonderful that he healed him, but it's significantly more important that Jesus forgave him and explained that to him.
Yeah, so we had that kind of wrapping up the end of chapter 8 and kicking us into chapter 9. Thank you, Sherry. Absolutely. And then Jesus is at this dinner party at the beginning of chapter 9, and he's causing some ruckus. And what is the issue? Why is he causing some controversy?
He's sitting down with sinners and tax collectors and
Oh my Lord, he's
Margin.
friends with those people.
oh
Yeah.
Those people, huh?
Those people, you know. Yeah, and he's befriending them and he's spending time and they're sharing the same space. Absolutely. Absolutely. And Jesus is talking about that he has a new way of doing things. We talked about the, I came not for the healthy, but for the sick, and talking about putting, you don't put new wine in old wineskins, that he's saying he's doing new things. And as we kind of wrap up chapter 9, what do we learn is kind of Jesus's fuel for his ministry? What is it that has been guiding him in his ministry? We learn in that verses 35 through 38.
of 9. Oh.
Passion.
There you go, Dan. Compassion. Yes. Yes,
Well, and
yes.
I was just going to say, I kind of see chapter 9 as just kind of a preparation of the disciples for, he set a lot of examples of how he wanted, what their ministry was going to be like, and he wanted to impart his compassion and his, acceptance and all of that to them before he moved on to their commissioning, so to speak.
Well, look who teed it up. I should have known the golfer would get ready to just tee it off so that we could get into chapter 10. That's perfect. That's exactly what Jesus does. We not only see about his compassion, but we see him in praying to say, God, I wish that there were, there are so many people in need. I wish there were some people ready to be sent out to enact your compassion, to live your compassion, and to go out and be among people living with compassion. So it's with that let's read. We're going to focus today on Matthew chapter 10, verses 1 through 16. And we're going to read it all in one chunk, but I'm going to ask for 3 readers. Is there somebody who'd be willing to read verses 1 through 4?
I will.
Okay, and then who would read verses 5 through 10?
I can.
Okay, Kathy, thank you. Anybody want to read 11 through 16?
I can do that.
All right.
Take
us away, Sherry.
And he called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction. The names of the 12 apostles are these: first, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew and his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him.
These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. As you go, preach this message. The kingdom of heaven is near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Do not take along any gold or silver or copper in your belts. Take no bag for the journey, or extra tunic, or sandals, or a staff, for the worker is worth his keep.
Whatever town or village you enter, search for some worthy person there and stay at his house until you leave. As you enter the home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake the dust off your feet when you leave that town or home. I tell you the truth, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves.
All right. All right. Thank you, all three readers. So, you've already answered the first question I had, which was about, what's the context? What's happened right before this? So Jesus, as we already talked about, Jesus has been praying for some people who will go out and to continue his ministry beyond what just one person can do. And so he is sending them out. They are the answer to his prayer. And so is there anything that you notice? We don't often, on Sunday mornings, assuming that there ever are Sunday mornings again, on Sunday mornings, we don't usually read the scriptures that have long lists of names. But is there anything that jumps out at you in those first 4 verses? Anything about the names of the disciples?
Who's Thaddeus? You never hear about him.
Right. The poor dude, he gets no play anywhere else. Like, he doesn't get, he's, James and John are always jostling for first place. Peter's the first one to raise his hand for anything. You hear about Matthew, the tax collector. Of course, you hear about Judas, but I think Judas would prefer not. But, we don't hear about some of these others like Thaddeus or even Bartholomew or Philip. And I think it's really interesting to start thinking about, what about those unsung disciples? What must their journeys have been like? What must their faiths have been like? Absolutely. Anything else jumping out about that verses 1 through 4?
1 through 4, no. Well, my study Bible here says that Bartholomew is probably another name for Nathaniel, whom we meet in John 1:45 to 51. Thaddeus is also known as Judas, son of James. The disciples are also listed in Mark and in Luke. So, and I've heard of Nathaniel, and I've heard of the other Judas, so
Yeah.
that kind of explains what's going on with those names that we don't recognize in 1 through 4.
Yeah. And did you notice so we talk about the people that Jesus has collected there and sent out. What's their task?
Cast out demons and heal
Yeah.
the sick.
Man. Yeah. So, that's easy peasy, right?
Yeah, right. Minor assignment.
Yeah.
Minor. Man, could you imagine? Talk about being thrown into the deep end of something. Have you ever, this makes me think, because I'm sure those disciples, they've been along for the ride. They've been enjoying this. They've been, kind of watching these amazing things and hearing the teachings, and your first assignment is to go out and cast out demons and to heal the sick. Has there ever been a time in your life where you felt like you were kind of thrown into the deep end sometime when you were asked for something that just felt, how in the heck am I going to do that? Or why do they think that I could do that?
Mhm.
And how did you respond?
Well, I guess, yes. 50 years ago, when I climbed off the Silver Bird and got on the runway at Tonsanut, and then they go, oh, okay, here's where you're going to go. And the next thing I know, I'm out in the middle of the jungle and going through a school where you can and can't shoot. And then the next thing I know, I'm even further in the jungle, further out in the middle of nowhere. And here's your job. Here's what you got to do. And so I think second nature just kicks in, and all the training that you've had, you bring it up and you use it.
Yeah.
And then you hope that everything that you do is right or close to right anyhow.
You know, I mean, while it's a very different setting than what Jesus and those disciples, Ron, what I hear you saying is talking about a time where you had training, but the landscape was so unfamiliar, and that you kind of have to trust in that training and just respond as best as you think you can. And I bet those disciples kind of felt like it was unfamiliar territory, and it was a new adventure that they probably felt out of their depth too.
Well, also he told them not to go among the Gentiles or the Samaritans, whom they were probably more familiar with, but he was to go to the lost children of Israel. So basically they're going to be going into the territory of the Jews, which is even probably more unfamiliar to them.
Well, we'll talk about that in a sec. Other stories of times where you felt like you were being thrown into the deep end or asked to do something that was beyond what you thought you could do?
Reminds me of when I started my student teaching. You know, here's your classroom, 30 11th grade students, honors. Yeah, it was terrifying.
I would bet so. I would absolutely bet so.
It's funny, Carly, I actually was thinking the exact same thing when I student taught.
Yep.
It was, there was no textbook, and the idea was that I would be the textbook. There was no curriculum, you know, and having known what I knew, that was helpful, but to get all these kids and think, what am I going to do?
Exactly.
It's definitely a different situation.
Yep.
For sure.
Who are those guys?
I think I've shared before.
Who's that?
Such
I
a
think
big
I've
one.
shared this before, but I lost twins shortly after they were born many years ago. But I was in a situation at our church in Fort Worth, and my pastor, actually I was his secretary, but he called and asked me if I would go to the hospital, and there was a woman who was about to deliver a stillborn baby, and he asked me to go and be there with them. I had no idea who they were, and so I was, I mean, that was really I was fairly young, and I was it was just a really difficult thing to go and, you know, be there, and I basically just shared my own experience. And I mean, it turned out great, and they were questioning whether they should see the baby and name the baby, and so I was just able to share my experience. And you know, and so, but I did, when he called, you know, my heart was in my throat. Like I can't. I've just been through it. How can I don't have any wisdom for anybody. But so yeah, it was kind of that was a hard situation too. But there again, I think God just gave me the words and just led me through it. So
I think those are amazing examples. I love those examples. I remember one time, and this is oh man, especially in comparison to the example shared, very trite. But I remember one time I went in for a serving position for waiting tables, and I had gotten a call back, and they had told me that I was gonna start, and I at that point had done about like 8 or 10 other serving gigs before, restaurant gigs, and you could always count on that, like, the first day you would sign all the paperwork, you would get an apron, you would take a look at the menu, you would watch some training videos. The next day and there would be like 3 or 4 days of training. And so I showed up and they said, we'll get to the paperwork later. We open in 15 minutes. Here's the menu, and let me show you where the computer is. It's you and one other person who will be coming in a half hour. So we'll see if you don't mess this up today, then you're hired.
Oh,
wow.
That's crazy.
And somehow 2 weeks later, I was the manager. And a whole new set of filling in over my head.
Oh my gosh.
So it prepared you for pastorship, huh?
Yeah, definitely a lot of scurrying to clean, to bust tables and to reset others. Yes. Although I will say, service industry, yeah, I think everybody should be in some retail or service industry at some point in their life, or teaching somewhere, some sort of experience that's a very humbling experience. Well, hey, we're actually, did anybody else have a story or something that you had felt like when you went into the deep end of something?
Well, I was also thinking of when I started at the high school, because my experience was babysitting and daycare. So I was used to real little kids. And then I started at the high school, and it was totally different. But it turned out to be a really good experience. So, but yeah, it was a little intimidating at first.
Yeah, and I don't know if you all can feel this or how you feel about it, but I need a little bit of fear. Like, I feel like if you're doing something, it's easy to not be afraid if you're not risking much. But those things that cause you to grow and those things that cause you to like take a big step, fear is going to be a part of that, Courage is going to require some fear and some growing beyond what you think you can do. And I'm sure those disciples probably, maybe the gospel writers edited it out, but I'm sure they had some sort of response to Jesus of like, are you sure there's nobody better? Maybe we should do some more training. Can we at least have a little something? Where's the textbook? That kind of stuff. But yeah, but they had enough. They had enough. We're going to dig in. Most of what we're going to talk about for the rest of the day is going to be that verses 5 through 10. But I want to jump to the very end and just look at that 11 through 16. And that last, what is Jesus talking about in verse 16? See, I'm sending you out like sheep into the midst of wolves. Be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. What does that mean? What's his metaphor?
well, sheep were often attacked by wolves, and that was a relatively known picture of the time for them, something that they could certainly relate to. Um,
Yeah.
so I think it communicated clearly to them that um, this was not going to be an easy task, and he knew that. He appreciated that.
Yeah, and I love, so thinking back to that opening section, it says that Jesus gave them all authority to heal every disease, and yet still in that verse 11 through 16, he's kind of preparing them of like, not everyone's going to receive this well. You're not going to be welcomed in everybody's house. This is not going to be perfect. Why would he do that? I thought these were the disciples. Shouldn't they just expect 100% success?
Well, first of all, I think it's interesting that he sent them to the Jewish community first. But that he also recognized that they would be wolf-like they might possibly be wolf-like to them. But
and I think the shrewd, then as they are going out among the wolves, they did need to be very shrewd and discerning and wise, and
Really,
figure out what direction they needed to go. You see a snake, going and figuring out, where it needs to go along the way. And I think, they did need to be shrewd in that way.
Well, I think the mention of wolves here is really they're going to go out and be among the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and those are the wolves.
Right.
So they have to be very, very shrewd, like a snake. A snake knows how to go one way or go the other way, and it knows when to rear back its head and hiss at you, and it also knows when to get out of Dodge real quick.
Right.
Maybe it's just my days in Nashville. I keep thinking of that Kenny Rogers song, "The Gambler." Like, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and when to run.
Exactly.
Very true. Very true.
I feel like if Jesus had been in mid 20th century Appalachia, that might have been a little bit closer to his instructions to the disciples here. So
I kind of think he was preparing them for what it was going to be like when he was no longer there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I think he recognized that radicalness of love and how so many people were fearful of what he provided. And having experienced everything, or knowing what he would experience, it just was I almost get this sense of keep your head down, your mouth shut, just do the work kind of a thing. But, just knowing what's in the background anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Jesus is kind of preparing them that there will be hard days. There will be disappointment. There will be people who are, Carly, I think that's a really good thing. I'll say that for me, for my ministry, I had never planned on going into congregational ministry until I actually got to seminary. And that was my first time really being down in the American South. And I know that I had witnessed racism, and I had witnessed, acts of racism and racist thoughts, but I had never seen like entire cultures built, or I'd never been as aware of entire cultures built around segregation and racist divides, and just,
Oh yeah.
And so for me, it was a wake-up call that like, and that's just one of the many isms, as we've talked about, still a very pertinent one, but it's one of those that it just hit me like, oh, some people don't really view all people as lovable, as fully human. And like that message of Jesus is still controversial, is still a challenge to receive.
I picked up the Does Jesus book, which is written in Hawaiian Pidgin, which is a true language in Hawaii. But I thought this was interesting. It's translation of verse 16. So you guys got to think just like the snakes and no hurt anybody, just like the doves. So think like a snake and be careful of people like the doves. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I really like that. And thinking about the different, how sometimes different versions give us some broader context. And in fact, Carly, I appreciate that you brought that up because I wanted to share with you. I'm going to try sharing. We'll see how it works. I'm going to try sharing my screen. Thinking about that verses 5 through 10, because that's the big part. Hopefully, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
All right. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Message version, but it's kind of a modern translation of the text. And I love this version because we already heard the verses 5 through 10, and most of our versions are more like this New Revised Standard on the left here. But I'm just going to kind of read through verses 5 through 10 on the Message. So this is after Jesus has gathered the disciples together, and he says, "Don't begin by traveling to some far-off place to convert unbelievers. And don't try to be dramatic by tackling some public enemy. Go to the lost, confused people here, right here in the neighborhood. Tell them that the kingdom is here. Bring health to the sick, raise the dead, touch the untouchables, kick out the demons. You've been treated generously, so live generously." And I love this. Instead of the take no gold or silver or copper, don't think you have to put on a fundraising campaign before you start. You don't need a lot of equipment. You are the equipment. And all you need to keep that going is 3 meals a day. Travel light. How does that change how you hear the mission that Jesus gives the disciples? How do you hear that differently at all?
Well, it's a lot different than when they used to have all the ministers travel around in the late 1880s and early 1900s, where they came in, set up a tent, and of course they took donations so that they could keep going to the next town. He's saying that you just need to go and put out the word and let the people take care of it.
Sorry, go ahead, Kathy.
I kind of get the impression that he doesn't want them to really draw attention to what they're doing. Just go and find those people and heal those people. Because he said not to like get in conflict with a public person. And so I kind of feel like he just wants to kind of, not maybe in secret, but not in a lot of attention to what they're doing.
How might you see that today? Do you see certain ministries that are, what do you think those instructions would be today? What does it look like to let's see here, proclaim the good news that the kingdom of heaven has come near, to cure the sick, to raise the dead, to cleanse the lepers, cast out the demons? What does that look like to you? What do you think that could be? That's always the hard question, right?
I kind of think he's saying, don't take on more than you can handle. Start with your neighbors. Start with loving those who are close to you, and then take, on bigger challenges. But just start by, like he said, love your neighbor as yourself, and then go on from there after you have learned those simple skills to
Barb,
use
that's
them for bigger
absolutely great.
tasks.
I know that we've talked a few times. I've heard people talk a few times already in our gathering about why did he say don't go to the Gentiles? Did he dislike the Gentiles? Was he, what was he doing? I think he really was saying, because they were all Jewish people from that community. He was saying, just stay here in the community. You don't have to do some mission trip to the other side of the world. Sometimes it's, trust me, well, maybe I'm just the only one, but even though we love the people we are surrounded with in quarantine, sometimes it's hardest to love them. Sometimes I'll be like, no, send me on a mission trip. I'll go, send me to some other country. But sometimes it's harder to love those people that we're closest to, or that are our literal neighbors. Yeah, and so Jesus is saying, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's easy sometimes to get involved in all the big campaigns, and let's go protest on the steps, and let's go, participate in the walks and the big things that protest, and while there's nothing wrong with that, and I think we do have to look inside and see, how am I treating my neighbor? How am I treating my family members? Those other, there's a place for those other big campaigns and events and protests, but, we do need to look inside and make sure that, we're taking care of business right, in our neighborhood before we think we need to go out and be the,
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
think we need to not saying that we are missing, but I think we need to remember that the Jewish people of that time were the people. They were, for these disciples, they were the church. And I think it's important to grasp that Jesus recognized that the church had some flaws, and there were some reasons that his disciples needed to minister among the people of the church. Because we often think that the church is who ministers, and we don't remember that the church needs ministered to. They need to be healed.
I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term of like missional church. So often for a long time, mission was this idea of you go somewhere else and you do a mission to someone else, usually not even with some other community, but to some community. But the idea of a missional church is really saying everything we do is about living into church. And so that does involve our relationships with those people that are within the congregation and the community, as well as those that are beyond it. But I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right, Carly. It starts within. It's like, I love that story that about Mother Teresa, when somebody asked, how do I make world peace? And she said, go home and love your family. It's the first step. And that goes a long way. If we could all do that, that goes a long, long way. Good. How else? Any other thoughts on that verses 5 through 10? How else do you see that being lived? Or what's a call to the church today? I'm going to be honest. I've never helped raise the dead, I don't think. Feeling a little slacker in that department. But what's Jesus mean to cure the sick, to raise the dead, to cleanse the lepers, and to cast out demons?
Well, he equipped them to be capable of taking care of the body as well as the soul. I love that. I think that's just a really cool calling, and I don't think of it as something that I do in my life, but truly it is taking the opportunity to share who we are and what we believe in. Right now, I don't reach out to strangers. I'm just still concentrating on the two ladies from church that we kind of look after each other. And it's an opportunity to give them a word of encouragement. Sometimes I feel like they exhort me, and I need to pay attention to my work. So I don't know if healing is part of that, but perhaps coming alongside offers us an opportunity to enrich each other's lives as well as share what Christ is doing in our lives. I've never been out on the mission field. I don't want to go there.
But I mean, I think that's what Jesus is saying. You are in the mission field by simply engaging and being with, calling on Dora and Carol and Anne, and that is mission, and that is bringing health, and that is bringing new life. That is raising the dead in some ways. I think sometimes we discount our own. Sorry.
Okay.
I know it sounds so much cooler if somebody else does it. It's kind of hard for us to receive. So maybe this is a good question as we always think towards how is this scripture coming alive today? Is there a time where because of someone else, is there a time where you've ever received these gifts, where you have ever felt, healthier, or if you've ever felt like you've been given new life, or if you felt cleansed, or if you felt helped to chase out some of your demons? Has there been somebody in the name of Jesus that's helped you?
Me?
You.
Well, I will say this, and I hesitate to say it because I may get tearful. But this lady right here,
Don't get me tearful.
20 years ago, a long time ago, we went through a period where we did not see each other for 12 years. We didn't really even know where each other was in the world. And I was in a very, very, very dark place. But about 22 years ago, we rediscovered one another, and she really was very instrumental in, absolutely God used her to pull me out of that dark place. And it's profound. And I'll stop there.
Thank you for sharing.
So 5 years ago, she asked me to marry her. So. We have a very strange story if anybody ever wants to hear it. It's really odd, but
I'm waiting for the movie.
trust me.
It would be a good one.
Thelma and Louise Part 2. There we go. They did not die.
And I know that we have quite a few folks within our community and even connected to our church that have found through church and through a relationship with God a new life after addiction. And that's been, I didn't even realize this. I get on a weekly Zoom with clergy, with other clergy. And there was a clergy member on the Nebraska Zoom, but who shared that, because we were talking about how you're struggling, what your struggles are with isolation and with this season. And I didn't realize that apparently this person had been a heroin addict 20 years ago. And they were talking about how they were still feeling, and especially in this hard season, that like it was really hard for them to stay sober. How they had new life because of their sobriety, and how it really was death dealing to them before, and that it's new life for them. And I think about the many ways that the church has helped be a part of that for folks. Any other stories of times where you've been on the receiving end, or I think it's okay to celebrate too, times where you felt you've been able to do some of this kind of ministry that Jesus is talking about with the disciples?
Well, I can say on a very, it seems small probably to a lot of people, but for Carly and I to be able to worship at South Point, there are very few churches. In fact, we went for years, several years, where we just didn't, we pretty much weren't able to go to church because people don't accept us. And we don't need everybody to agree with us. We totally get that people don't, there are people that don't agree with our lifestyle. But to be accepted and to be allowed to worship, to be allowed to be part of ministry, because there are churches that will allow us to come, just don't be a part of ministry. They'll minister to us and try to change. But just the fact that we're accepted and allowed to worship is a ministry to us, so that we can have a place to go and worship and minister and not feel like, we have to hide. Because we did go to church at one church where we hid it. We didn't want anybody to know, but we wanted to worship. But so, those just people loving us and allowing us to be there. We appreciate South Point doing that for us. So.
Well, that's so good to hear. That's good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we're at kind of that 10-minute mark before kind of winding down. And Carly, I apologize. I had Carly Nichols. I had muted you earlier, so I'm sorry for.
No, I'm muting myself because I keep getting followed everywhere I go.
So popular.
It's okay. Sometimes we have to put the dogs out because ours get rowdy behind us sometimes.
Oh, I like their question. Mommy, are you done talking to your friends now?
No.
Well, hey, so what are some what are your takeaways? What is it that sticks with you from these 16 verses, either that you saw differently or something you want to remember to hold on to, or some wisdom that was shared in this group that you want to carry with you?
Well, never so dramatically, but we're all called to minister to one another. And that's a sweet thing. Met a lady in the grocery store yesterday, and she had to use a little scooter, and she just looked exhausted by the time she was ready to go out to her car. I just took a minute to speak to her and encourage her, and I felt blessed talking to her, and she was very kind to me, and I felt blessed by her sweetness. And I guess it is blooming where we're planted. Look for opportunities, and if you're prompted, obey it. If God prompts you to speak, don't be shy. Just it's there. The Spirit is there to do the work, and we just need to be a willing vessel.
Thank you, Sherry. And what a season to talk about blooming where you're planted. Man,
Yeah.
oh man, we've had some opportunities to do that.
Amen.
Good. What else? What other takeaways?
I'm looking at verse 8, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Throughout the Bible, New Testament particularly, we see that those are recurring ailments. So that my impression is that those were the common social, perhaps health, but social issues of that day.
Yeah.
And so it makes me think, what are the social elements of my day that I need to be cognizant of and do something about in my way, heal in whatever way I can. And I think about the young man in Alabama or Georgia who was murdered, and that whole racial prejudice issue that will not go away in America. To me, that's one of those social elements of our day.
And I kind of like the end of that verse that you read, Carly, that freely you have received, freely give. And I think that we just have to be willing to be open to what we can do.
Mhm.
I love that, Kathy, and I think that connects us because I think it's easy to I don't know about anybody else, when you see that list of curing the sick, raising the dead, cleanse the lepers, it's easy to be like, great, somebody else can do that. I'm not able to do that. I can't, that's too much. But when we start with an awareness and a gratitude for all that we have received, and a gratitude when we consider times when amazing things have been given to us or shared with us or shaped us, it's easier to see, well, maybe, like Sherry was saying, maybe I can be a vessel for allowing this to happen for others. Yeah, and even to tackle the big issues of the day, as Carly was saying, whether it's racism, sexism, homophobia, addiction, depression, mental health stigmas. I mean, we've got plenty, or literal access to healthcare, as we're talking here. I mean, these are all things that in Jesus's time, those are the issues of health, and not only for individuals, but for communities. Jesus was always aware of how individual health and individual status affected a community. And so how are our communities sick? And what is health and healing for our communities? So I'm glad that we're thinking both in the personal and the communal. That's a really important thing. Good.
I think about where I work, and of course it's not as pertinent right now because I'm home and I like my office mate. But I think about our situation where I work downtown. We're right by the Capitol, and the homeless situation has been very difficult, but it's been very difficult to deal with both sides of it, because I have young students that work for me, and they don't harass me as much. They don't catcall me. At my age, they're not going to do that, but there's a lot of harassment of these young girls, and yelling at them and yelling inappropriate things at them, and so we've had to deal with them, and so it's given me a prejudice against homeless people, I think, that I didn't realize was there. Because on the other side, I've said that we were almost homeless. And so I do have an understanding of that and a love. But then when we deal with the other side of it, it does kind of, taint how your love for them because of some of the experiences you deal with. So I think we just have to you know, have the love that Jesus had for the homeless, because they're not all, you know, there's just a few that we have to deal with that are difficult. But I just think we all have to look inside and see what it is in us what is our prejudice. We all have some kind of, you know, preconceived notions of people and that kind of thing.
I think that's great, Diane, to think about not only how we can each be a part of the healing, but the ways that we each need to be healed of our divisions as well.
Exactly.
Be
Good.
shrewd like a snake and
Yeah.
soft like a dove.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other, these have been great takeaways. Any other takeaways or last thoughts?
Yeah, Steve, I just so oftentimes think about how God works through you. I see the boldness in you and how you could just as easily be reticent or shy, and you just step out from that and you reach out to others and minister in the sweetest way. And you're always ready to share something with them, to encourage them in their life. And you're a good example. Really, it's really helpful to think about I can be courageous too. I don't have to be a minister, but I can be a speaker for Christ and be willing to reach out to others and love them. I have to tell you, Steve, you've been a role model. You know, in the short time that I've known you, you've had a strong influence on the way I look at a body of people. You've been very strong influence on that. It's all good.
Sherry, that's so humbling. Thank you for sharing. And, you know, I got to say, I mean, I'm definitely one of those where I think it's cyclical. I think we support each other, and I think we inspire one another without realizing it. And I know that literally each and every one of you on this call have done that for me at times. And I think we all just encourage one another to help us use our gifts and to go out and to serve God and wherever we are planted, and to be able to bring healing and wholeness in whatever ways that we can. And so maybe as we close down, maybe that is our prayer. Maybe that's the prayer for this week, that you can bloom where you're planted, that you are those disciples who have been given freely by God, and that you are given to be a blessing for others. And so thank you. Thank you for the ways that you already are doing this, and for the ways that we continue to support one another. And thanks for this time of sharing and this study. Next week we'll be in Matthew chapter 11, continuing our way through the Gospel of Matthew. At some point we're going to have to talk about if we want to continue during the summer. I know I had planned on, before this whole coronavirus, stopping during the summertime, but think about whether we want to continue during the summertime, or if we'd like to take a break, and we can talk about that maybe next time a little bit, do a little housekeeping. But for now, thank you all, and blessings on your week and blessings on your ministries that you may not even know that you're doing. You guys have a beautiful week. Thanks everyone for participating.
Yeah, good to see you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.